thank you so much again for last time. It was phenomenal. I had a great time chatting with you, and we got some great emails from our listeners as well. They thoroughly enjoyed your journey and your stories. So
Great.
figured I might as well join and start talking to you about the other two projects from a while ago, right? So
Yeah.
yeah. So maybe we can just start with 28 Days. How did you get on board that project? It's been a while. It came out in early 2000s.
Yeah. I'd done two films with Danny for the BBC, very kind of art house projects, which, passion projects for him. One of them was Strumpet, and the other one was called Vacuuming Completely Nude in Paradise, which is probably the best title of any film I've ever worked on. So, and it was a lot of fun, and we got on very well creatively. And he mentioned something else was coming up to keep myself available. And one day I got a call when I was in Los Angeles. And I forget the exact words he said, but it was something like, I'm doing a zombie home movie. And no one seems interested yet, so we can do what we want with the music. So we're interested. So, and of course, I said, yeah, it sounds perfect. And then when he was ready, he sent me some footage, and it was the most shocking thing I'd ever seen, in terms of what I would be working on. Incredibly raw, very visceral, nothing like anything I'd ever seen. And it was much more disturbing than any zombie film I'd ever seen, that's for sure. And I was intrigued by this and the idea, and I knew Alex Garland, and I'd read the script at that point, and I knew it was something special. We had no idea that the film would be so important for the genre. And the funny thing was, after that very first call from Danny, where he gave this very, understated, typically Northern English, downplayed description of what he was doing, we never ever used the word zombie ever again, because it was clear, even when I read the script, that, for me, it was always a road movie. It was an apocalyptic road movie. Yeah. And, we never ever used the zombie word ever again, the Z word, because it was clear that it was something very different from that. And that's basically how it happened. Yeah, he just called me up one day, and that was his that was his description of what he was doing, which was typical Danny. Danny's not Hollywood at all. He downplays everything, and that was how it happened.
It was a very groundbreaking film. So obviously, when it came out, I saw it, but I had forgotten most of it, and then I saw it during COVID. The idea of just everything kind of being shut down, and there's nobody out there, and especially watching downtown streets of London, like Westminster area and everywhere, where it was completely nobody there. Obviously, they shot at a certain time with minimal traffic, and obviously got some permissions and what. But it was, again, I never thought of it as a zombie movie. It's funny you mentioned that, because there was so much more to that film, and that kind of set not saying that those kind of films didn't exist before, but in the past they were less character driven, more just kind of like zombies attacking people. It started this trend, with so many other films, and even, I don't know if you've seen the new series on HBO, The Last of Us.
I haven't. I really want to see that, because there was a point when I was getting asked to do video games, and I'd still love to do a video game one day. And I remember talking to a few friends who were in the industry, And everybody said to me, you know, if you're talking about the music, you really should listen to the score for The Last of Us. So without playing the game or anything, I asked my son Jude, who's a gamer, and he said, yeah, the music to The Last of Us is amazing. So I listened to the soundtrack for it, and it's beautiful, it's amazing. So I always thought that would be the first game that I would play, because I've still never played one without, apart from sitting with my son and trying to play stuff. So when I saw that he'd made this series, I thought, I've really got to watch that, because it just seemed like an amazing idea. And, that'll be the first sort of game I ever play when I do get around to it. But yeah, I do want to see the show for sure.
Yeah, it's a good 8-9 episodes, I think it was. And it reminded me a lot of 28 Days, only obviously it was a longer format with much more character development and episodic, but with 28 Days later, there was just something that there was a lot of, I use this word a lot because that kind of set the trend, the Spielberg and Jaws, like how the shark was never visible to the audience for a long time until the last act. And, there was that, obviously 28 Days Later wasn't in that kind of duration, but that element was there of not knowing what the hell is going on. Like all I remember when I watched it again during COVID was it had to do with the virus. And there's some, for the lack of better words, zombies. That's it. That was my memory of it. And then when I saw it again, it was just incredible. Maybe because I saw it during COVID, I don't know. But it hit hard so much. Like it was just right on the point in every which way.
Yeah, I mean, the whole opening, the tension that's dragged out is it's very Hitchcockian, to sort of really drag the audience to the point where they can't take any more suspense. It's like letting the audience do the work. It's like let them get fearful and let them get tense, and that whole opening was perfect. It's just one of those perfect ways to sort of bring you into that world. Good stuff.
Wait, go on.
I'm just saying there was a lot of things in that movie which absolutely did not fall into the typical zombie
cliche.
Sort of structure. So it made it easier for me to work with.
And speaking of, your work in that, I listened to the score a few times again, and there was just, I'm going to have a difficult time explaining it, but I'm going to do my best. There was somewhat of calmness in it, yet terror. And it had that feeling of the 80s kind of music, at least the sound of it. What was your inspiration, if any, when trying to sort of come up with the theme and the tracks and all that?
Well, the only real inspiration for the music was the script and the film itself. As soon as you step out of that template, you got something new. You've got to do something that is as original as the movie was. Then there's no reference points, and then that's suddenly a wonderful place to be, because when you're not thinking, I don't want to be as let the side down here by it not being as great as a score as this type of film that was the same genre. The minute you sort of feel like you're doing something new with a project, you sort of cast adrift. You sort of don't know where it's going to go. So, and that's the most creative place to be. So there wasn't any reference points at all working on that film. We just didn't know what was going to work. And the funny thing is the very first version of the score, Danny had the idea of what if we sort of had a score that was just basically snippets of, he called it Detrius floating around the earth of like bits of radio broadcasts and bits of sounds from the past and all of these things that were part of the culture of the world that were now disintegrating. And that would be our score. And I thought this was phenomenal. It reminded me of when Hitchcock asked Bernard Herrmann to score the birds, and Herrmann said, "Why would you want music in this? Let's just get sound effects of bird noises, and I'll work with that." Which, I mean, this was 80 years ago. So he was that far ahead of his time, Bernard Herrmann, that he realized that the best way to score the music for the birds was to actually have no music and to use sound design. He was doing that then. So when Danny suggested this to me, that we just have these bits of lo-fi disintegrated sounds drifting in and out the ether, I thought that was amazing. So, I got to work with, I got these old Bakelite radios and I was feeding bits of music through them. And, I remember having a microphone on a stick and I was waving it around, like the sort of Beatles thing in Sgt. Pepper's. And, I recorded all of this crazy stuff. I was recording bits of music as music, and then we were putting them through these Bakelite radios and then recording them by swirling the microphone around. Completely gratuitous and it was amazing. Some of the stuff we got was just phenomenal. But when we put it in the score in the movie, there was a moment where we both kind of loved it, and we both kind of realized that maybe the movie does need a little bit of music somewhere. Because, as much as we loved it, it was, it felt like, it was just an amazing, art house movie then, rather than a big emotional, dramatic work. And then we sort of said, yeah, it's awesome, but maybe we do need a few bits of music in there too. But, the nice thing is, some of that stuff actually stayed in the film. The opening sequence with the jump, and you have all that blasts of radio and static. That was me. That was part of the score that we were originally creating. That people go, "What's that sound effect?" It's not. It's actually I was grabbing snippets of these sounds that I'd made with these Bakelite radios and distorting them. We were putting radio broadcasts through fuzz pedals, and I mean everything I do goes through a fuzz pedal at some point. And then we were pasting them together like a collage. So that stayed, and there was some of the bits and pieces we'd recorded, do appear in and out of the score. So it wasn't all for nothing. Some of it stayed, but we both realized that there was moments where we needed some real emotion. The scenes around Frank when the crow drops the blood and it goes in his eye, and obviously the big end, and so it ended up being kind of a hybrid between this very original idea of the Detrius floating around the ether and then some bits of music. But it was just experimentation, and it kind of ended up very much its own thing. And one of the other ideas was so I think I watched one zombie film just to make sure that I was not doing anything that was too cliched and that had been done before. And while I was watching it, I had a thought, because typically with the music to a classic zombie film, you have the quiet bits where there's no music.
Yeah.
And then you have the explosions of violence, and then the music comes in. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool to do the opposite of that? So instead of having music when we had the real visceral violence sections, we just don't do any music there. But when it goes to the quiet sections, the more reflective sequences, that's when the music comes in. And I thought that might be a good way to kind of humanize the characters.
Yes.
So it's kind of like an inverted version of a zombie score. It's like it was the opposite to what you're supposed to do. And you know, I sort of talked to Danny about this, and he said, "Let's try it." So, and that's kind of how we did it. And I think that set the film up in a different way, because you'd have these beautiful moments where they were just these humans trying to survive, and then when it got to the, you know, the violent stuff, we just left it to the screams and the effects. And for me, that was way more terrifying, you know? So, you know, once we'd established that, you know, the rest of it became kind of obvious what to do, even though I was always trying to find different ways of, like, sonically how to do this. But, you know, the whole score is very lo-fi, really. Apart from the, you know, the end sequence, the rest of it's quite lo-fi. And even when, you know, I'd record things in a lo-fi way, you know, we typically ended up compressing it more and you know, doing whatever we could to just fuck the sound up, you know, just to make it feel like even the music was disintegrating and falling apart. But it was, I mean, it was a lot of fun to. I mean, I love all that stuff, you know. I mean, I'll just do that all day if you let me.
Yeah, no, it makes so much sense, you know, sometimes the lack of music. If you look at films like Jurassic Park, the very first one, the first time we see T-Rex, that entire sequence, I mean, I realized this 5-6 years ago, I don't even pay attention to it. There is no music. I mean, it's just literally playing on rain, T-Rex, and similar thing with Castaway. I was talking to a cinematographer of Castaway, Don Burgess, who's worked quite a bit with Robert Zemeckis, and you know, they kept trying to figure out what music throughout the film, and then they just realized, why don't we just take the music out? And the first time you hear the music is when he actually, you know, tries to leave the island. But it's the sound effects are so important, whether you're making a film, narrative, documentary, you know, even hearing someone opening a drawer while they're talking adds so much to your characters, to the personality of the film, and people don't realize that. But no disrespect to music. Music is obviously very essential, but sometimes less of it, especially in this case, and I noticed that with this film, is that, you know, normally there's those scary moments and you'll hear a pin drop silence, and you know there's going to be a loud music coming up as soon as somebody appears from behind the curtain or something, but you don't get that in this film, and that's where I think the audience and that reverse approach worked, because aside from being a great film, the audience wasn't expecting; they were expecting the norm, which they didn't get.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you mention that, because I have this argument sometimes with directors, or I used to have this argument with directors. You know, sometimes the most powerful device that music can use in a movie is to stop. You know, it's actually just to stop being there, because that in itself creates attention
so much
that you can't really get from just, you know, you can't take the sound effects. I mean, you can take the sound effects away, but with music, because it means something differently to people, you know, that moment when you suddenly stop, you know something's going to happen, you know, and you allow that beat for it to sort of register. But yeah, I mean, you know, the Coen brothers are brilliant examples of that. I mean, the way they use sound design, you know, because they realize that it's all about telling the story. You know, Foley, sound effects, music, we're all telling a story, and sometimes you tell that story clearer by, you know, allowing one thing to take over, because there's only so much information that somebody watching a movie can take before it starts to become less of a clear idea. So, you know, it's like when you see movies and suddenly all of the sound effects go and it just becomes music. It's just a montage. It tells a different story. When you take
Gotcha.
everything out, and it's incredibly powerful. And it's the same the other way around. It's like when you stop the music and you just go to and you suddenly hear someone, breathing. It becomes claustrophobic, and it's as if the camera is like pulled right up close. So it's just knowing when and where to give way. Who should take over now? Should this be the music? And I can usually see it even reading the script. Where the music should, take a step back to the effects, and vice versa. It's just knowing when to hand over. But I mean, one of my favorite scores has the least amount of music of anything, which is The Godfather. It's like just like 20 minutes can go from The Godfather and you hear no music. And then after all that time, you suddenly hear that little mournful da, 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 da. It's terrifying because you've then become conditioned to not hearing any musical instrument, and you hear that one little thing, and the sheer absence of everything up to that point makes that entry devastating. And death is imminent. Something's going to go down. So it's, for me, less is more with music. I don't think I've ever done a movie where I haven't felt that we didn't have too much music. And it's always better when you have that daylight, or that realism. Because again, with the other big seesaw with a movie in terms of music is how that thing of reality and then being cinematic, and we think of cinematic movies as being the big score and everything. So but to have that impact, you do have to come away sometimes and let the realism take over before the super realism comes back in when you introduce music again. So it really is, you've just got to find those moments, really. But I'm a big fan of no music, ironically. I'm a big fan.
I believe it makes so sense. I'm just like talking to you, and I'm thinking about some of the films that come to my mind where it had the least amount of music, but the theme stood out. Scent of a Woman with Al Pacino and Chris O'Donnell, which was directed by Martin Brest, and then Peter Weir's Dead Poet Society with Ethan Hawke and Robin Williams.
A great example.
Yeah, and the whole thing with sound is that it's so funny. How I discovered this making films is that when you're making even documentaries and you're following a subject or subjects, and you have their audio interview playing in the background, but if the action is happening on the screen, when you hear sound effects, whatever it is, whether they're starting the car, whether they're riding a boat or just footsteps, it is. And I've done this. I've actually turned the sound effects off on the track and just let the person talk and put some music, and it's just totally horrible. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. But to have a bit of everything, provided where it's required, makes a huge lot of difference.
Yeah, I mean, every good director knows this, and a lot of it is informed by where's the camera pointed. You've got to see. I mean, one of the things I learned along the way is if you're ever stuck with music, just always look at where the camera is pointing. Follow the camera. If it still is on someone's head, then there's a moment where we're meant to feel that we're meant to understand what's happening internally, and that can be effects or that can be music. But by the minute the camera starts moving, that could be the place to bring the music in, because we're evolving into something. So I mean, it's always, you can usually figure it out from the script, but the minute you see the scene, I always watch what the camera's doing. Is it still? Is it looking at this? Is it, if the camera's suddenly looking at a clock, then we're going to hear the clock. So you're sort of leading the audience. You're telling the story to the audience But really, we're all just kind of following the camera as well. So that informs better than anything. And, it's why, I mean, in the old days, I put the film on and go, okay, and then I'd sort of play away. But, now I'm writing as I'm looking up at the screen.
That's it. That's interesting.
And I'm following it. And I mean, when I'm writing stuff, I always have the effects and dialogue in, always. Because only then because if you don't, then you could be overloading information.
Yeah.
If it's clear that something is happening and the effects are all telling you that this is happening and the dialogue is, you don't have to then overload that same idea with the music. So you look at what the music might mean to this person, and you figured out, well, what other information can I give the audience here that maybe the effects can't give, or the dialogue can't give? What's the true meaning behind what this guy is saying? And then the audience the music can then find these little inroads to something else, and then that's when a scene becomes rich. If you're just doing a musical equivalent of the sound effects, then you're just overloading the information, one part of the information. So yeah, I mean, I always have everything playing when I'm writing, because then I can figure out the right way to weight a piece of music. You know what I mean? If something is incredibly sad in the narrative, then you don't always have to be so sad with the music, because we're already being given that information, so and that's something I learned along the way, and it's something I always try to tell composers who are breaking through. Don't look down, look up, because this is what the audience is seeing. And listen, play, keep the effects and dialogue up, because this is the experience that the audience is going to have. Find the places where you can support that and make a difference. Just sitting there jamming away isn't going to mean anything. You've got to work with it. Always work with it, and always work with the story. We don't write to picture, even though we're watching the picture. We're writing to story, and we use the picture to find the places where we can tell the musical side of the story.
Agreed. When you're writing a score, has there been in any film a certain scene came and you're trying to figure out what should go in here, whether it's drama, whether it's comedy? Have you ever been sort of connected to a personal part of your life, and then that sort of comes out from a special place, that track or that theme?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time, I think, I think that's where the best stuff comes. You can't just look at a scene and go, oh, this is a guy beating another guy up and he's scared of him.
Is there an example of something like that you can recall?
Yeah, I mean, I remember in one way or another, but I, sort of digging into personal stuff.
That's fine.
The first thing I try to do is understand why the character is feeling this way, because what music can do that effects and stuff can't do is get at the real emotions and get inside the head. So yeah, I mean, I always imagine what it would feel like to be in that situation, like even though the beginning of 28 Days Later used that great track from Godspeed, but the first thing I tried to do was to try to understand what I would feel like if I woke up and my family were gone, and what that would mean, and when Jim goes to find his parents and he knows they're going to be dead, and he gets there and they're both lying with each other and they leave the note. I was in tears, not because it was a sad scene, but because I felt like, what would that have been like, if it was me, and they leave the note going, this beautiful sad note that he left for him. I understood his desire to get there. So yeah, I mean, I'm always putting myself in that position. I mean, I think that's why I'm exhausted by the end of every movie. Because you're putting yourself in that position. And the same, with Guardians. One of my favorite scenes is when towards the end, when Rocket, when they're trying to get all the animals off the ship, and he stops and he remembers this big room. He remembers that that's where he grew up when he was a kid, and he remembers that that's where his first family was and his friends and what happened. And he's just instantly drawn towards walking towards these cages where, he began his life. And yeah, I mean, I completely put myself in that situation, and understand how difficult it can be to face your own childhood and understand things that didn't make sense at the time. And as Rocket's walking towards those cages, I completely was, what would it feel like for me? And I'm going back to the very beginning, to my very first memories, and so the music was written from that. It wasn't me writing, about a raccoon. It was writing about me. And then that moment when he realizes what he really is, and he accepts that, acceptance is one of the hardest things we can ever do in life.
Yeah.
When he accepts that, everything becomes simpler. And
isn't that funny though, right? Like, accepting something is such a simple thing, yet we spend our lifetime trying to accept something.
I know, and we won't have something in our psyche that is terrified of accepting what we really are, and we strive for it, but it's that thing. What you want the most is you got to walk towards your fear, and we're all terrified of that. More than mortality or anything, I think. Yeah. So yeah, in those moments, I mean, that was an example in that movie, and
sure.
And Sunshine, the big scene where he has to make that decision of to save the world, he's got to sacrifice himself. And, what would be going through his head? And again, it was like, would I do that? Could I sacrifice myself? And, at that moment, it wouldn't be the rest of the world that you were trying to save. It would just be the people that you loved. So that moment when he puts the suit on and he goes, I got to do this, and I got to get to the other ship, and I got to, launch the payload. It's, I was in that suit. I mean, I'm melodramatic at the best of times, and coming from Liverpool, we're kind of that way anyway. But it helps, I mean, if you can really feel what it would feel like, then that's the truest well to draw from. Otherwise, you're just writing to picture. Otherwise, you're just writing about a guy in a spacesuit doing a cool job. So for me, it's part of the process.
It's such a therapy too, right? Like, whether you're writing music or you're writing a script or you're directing or you're editing, whatever, costume design, because you are always somehow at a very interesting level connected to something that you're working on, because all of our stories, individual stories, are different and unique, but they're so much alike, and we are always able to find ourselves in somebody else's life.
I mean, and that's why movies are a big part of our culture, because it really all comes down to storytelling as well, and which is as old as humanity. The first things we ever did, and it's not being narcissistic or anything, but we do tend to be interested when we can relate to, and that's why movies are so powerful. It's why guys love The Godfather. It's like we want to have that honor and duty. We react to that family first. We react to these positive things in such a big emotional way, because we relate to the fact that we would like to be like that. And the more that an audience can relate, I mean, I think that I really think that's why James Gunn has been so successful in a way, because he can find something relatable, whether it's a tree, or it's a raccoon, or it's an otter, or whatever. He finds the humanity in these things, and he presents it in a way that all of us can relate to in a positive way. We all understand, why we love Groot, because he's got this, huge loyalty and courage, and we understand why we love Rocket, and I just think some directors can really tap into that in a very profound way, and I think that's one of the good things about him. But yeah, I mean, I always try to put myself in that position. I think that's
well, stories are so important, right? Like, even outside of the film world, I was talking to a CEO at Silicon Valley, and there's another friend of his that I also know, and we were just having a cup of coffee, and we were talking about story, and he goes to me, he said something that was like, that's so true, but it's such a profound thing to hear from someone, that is not in the entertainment world. He said that me and my friend, we're set for life. Our probably kids and grandkids are set for life, but at the same time, you don't know anything in life. And if tomorrow all of our wealth goes away, we have the comfort of knowing that we can sit around a fire and tell each other stories.
Yeah, I mean
that was just, when I heard that, I was like, wow, that is such a profound statement from someone who's not even in the film world. But that's how important stories are.
It is. I mean, it's everything. It's how we learn our values, isn't it? It's how we learn what's important and what isn't. And it's funny, because one of the best days I've had in the last few months was there was a power outage, and all we could do was sit around with candles. I couldn't work. I couldn't be worried about anything. There was no power to worry about emails, and we all just sat around, and and we just talked for hours, and it was like one of those profound things where you just think, why can't it always be like this? Why am I only interesting to my two kids when the power goes out, But it was funny, because even they felt it. You could sense that it was some kind of magical thing, and we were literally just sitting around with candles talking about stuff. And the power was only out for like 4 or 5 hours, but it was just one of those magical moments, and it just reminded me of, this is how we used to be for 99.9% of our existence. Is we'd be sitting around with some fire, and we'd be talking to each other, and people would learn and stuff and getting closer because of it. And it's just a part of modern society that we don't get the chance to do that anymore. Or we do get the chance, we just don't take it.
We just don't want to.
Power outage,
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was just, it was one of those great moments, really. I'm looking forward to the next power outage, because they get to talk to me again. Yeah.
It's so funny that, we are, I mean, I don't even think it was like before electricity. Even if you look back like 30, like before the internet, I genuinely feel life was a lot simpler. It was like the only thing that we had was, I mean, think about it. Like, I was just thinking about this other day. Now it's like, you send a text message to your spouse or to your parents or to your son. Okay, I am where I'm supposed to be, or I've landed, or I've done this. Back then, it was like, you don't get to get a phone call until, you probably get into the room or a hotel or someone's house. And then, it's so weird that how we are. It's good that we are all informed, but it's just, sometimes it's too much. Less is more. Less is so much more.
I mean, absolutely. It's I mean, it's not going to go away. I mean, that's the thing. We have to learn.
It's get worse.
It's only going to get worse, and we have to learn, to sort of keep our humanity and just live with it. But it's hard. I mean, I moan at my kids all the time. Get off your phone. Get off your phone. And what do I do when I sit down, and if I'm on my own and I sit and eat something? The first thing I'm doing is looking at the news or checking emails, and it's like it's hard for me to to have that discipline myself. So how can I expect
Yeah.
two teenage kids to do the same thing. But we, we are, for our mental health, we're going to need to figure out ways of reining that in, because it's more addictive than anything. It's worrying,
Yeah. No, I think, and it's hard what I'm going to say. I mean, it's something that I haven't been able to master, but having a schedule like after 8 o'clock or 8:30 p.m., nobody touches their phone. And just that's it. Like that is it. As much of an inclination that you get to do it. And believe me, like, I remember 25 years ago we went to a cottage. This was like early cell phone age, and it was up north, and none of the cell signals worked there. None of the phone lines worked there. So we were away for 3 days, and we were talking about it. They're like, how do we know the world is still, there's not a nuclear war somewhere else? What's going on? But that's how simple it used to be. Now you're like going through news and reading one bad thing after another.
Yeah, I know, but it's stopping us. I feel like it's that constant information and that constant access to information is keeping us on this very shallow understanding of everything. Because I really believe it's only when all this stuff is turned off that we drop a little bit deeper in thinking about stuff.
We will, yeah. There was actually a really good series about that that I think only lasted 3 series. J.J. Abrams produced it. It was called Revolution or Revolutionary, where literally the first episode, the power goes out and everything goes back to the way it used to be, across the world. Yeah, like you're running train on, no electricity, nothing, and you adapt.
Yeah, of course we adapt. I mean, that's that's why we're here. We were able to adapt better than any other species, and it's just interesting to see how we're going to adapt to this. But, at least we have the advantage of knowing what it was like before. But this generation of kids, I mean, they've only known
that's it,
and devices and stuff. So, I mean, how are they going to, I think, when we look back, I think there is going to be a sort of real tectonic shift in at that point when, in the way the world thinks. I'm not going to know this yet, but I think, when people look back, and it will be all about this instant access to information, and we're never going to be the same again. I mean, we're that generation that kind of knew both sides of it. But I think with my kids, they, apart from their early life, they've, in their recent memory, it's all been about phones and instant access and things being that way. And who knows where that's going to lead. But I just know they're both happier when they're not glued to the phone. If there's no reception and no internet, it's like they start talking to each other more and everything becomes like it used to be. So, hopefully we'll find a way to adapt to that. But, it's worrying for sure. It's definitely worrying.
The interesting thing is, by every generation, we always think the previous generation was better, right? So I'm thinking not our kids' generation, but the next generation, the way the technology is going. I mean, they're already talking about implanting chips, into people's brains for health reasons and whatnot. Imagine, instead of having a phone, everything is built in your head. And then it's like, this would seem like such an easy life. I genuinely feel we're headed in that direction. That way, especially in the last 6-7 months, AI, like, you just don't even know what the heck to watch and believe anymore.
I know. I mean, I saw this thing about AI this morning, which, and it's, you can go all the way back to H.G. Wells and all of these early science fiction writers, and they saw this kind of thing coming, and I read this thing this morning where they call it a black box syndrome or something, where they were giving information to this sort of network of AI computers, and they didn't give enough information about to translate certain languages. And of its own accord, it took the little bit of information that it had and just prompted itself to fill in the gaps. It actually, the AI network developed free will to go, I've got this little bit of information, I'm just going to work with that and figure out the rest of it. And it did. And it kind of freaked these scientists out, because everyone's been expecting, at what point does AI, start making decisions for itself? But it's happening, and it sort of then, once it had built this interpretation of this language, it went, okay, well, that's fact, so let's go with that. So, but can you imagine the consequences if AI is being used in war, or which it probably was designed for in the first place, just to give an advantage to certain states? Where is that going to go? If it's basically making decisions for itself, then how can we keep that unleashed? It's terrifying. It's absolutely, it's like we're giving free will to something without having the humanity or the soul to it. At what point is that not going to end badly? So anyway, it's just another.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, and this has been fascinating. We didn't get a chance to talk about Kick-Ass, which is fine. This was much more intriguing and much more fascinating.